in a startling development that signals an escalating crisis within the largest country in the world. Thousands of Russians are reportedly attempting to flee their homeland in the wake of President Vladimir Putin's controversial decision to partially mobilize civilians into the military. To stay up to date with the latest content, please remember to click on the like and subscribe buttons before getting started. This unprecedented move comes on the heels of significant losses sustained by Russian armed forces during their recent invasion of Ukraine, a strategic gamble that seems to be taking a heavy toll on Russia's military and civilian populace alike. The gravity of the situation is made all the more pronounced as European nations grapple with the implications of this mass exodus, concerned about the potential security risks it poses at their borders. Yet, as they face this daunting humanitarian and security challenge, some European officials are determined to place the onus back on Putin, indicating their intention to keep their borders firmly closed. This strategy is rooted in a desire to create a scenario where Putin must confront the fallout of his decisions domestically, thus amplifying the political pressure on his administration. Indeed, the unfolding crisis presents a complex and morally fraught situation that extends beyond the mere geopolitics of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It reveals the deep-seated internal tensions within Russia, a nation that appears to be at odds with itself, torn between patriotic duty and the instinct to escape a situation that has taken a dramatic and perhaps unexpected turn. The mass flight of Russians seeking to escape compulsory military service brings into sharp relief the human costs of this conflict, forcing a global spotlight on Putin's administration and the repercussions of its aggressive foreign policy. Russians are fleeing the country. The chaotic scene at Russia's land borders in the east, south, and west presents a stark picture of the ongoing crisis. Lines of cars, extending several kilometers, were seen on Friday as Russian citizens, particularly men eligible for conscription, sought to evade mandatory military service. A footage provided by Radio Free Europe offers a glimpse into the desperate attempts of Russian nationals to cross into neighboring countries, underlining the high-stakes gamble they are willing to take to avoid the draft. The Zemo-Larsi crossing into Georgia was especially congested. A Russian man reported that it took a staggering 12 hours to make it across. The slow progress, Ivan suggested, could be attributed to a deliberate strategy by Russian border guards to regulate the outflow of people. He noticed a marked change in the border processing rate after midnight, speculating that the surge in vehicles or an intentional slowdown by the border guards might be responsible. The story was no different at Russia's borders with Kazakhstan and Mongolia, where increased traffic and lengthy queues painted a picture of the growing unrest among the country's populace. On the other side of the vast country, Finnish border guards noted a more than twofold increase in traffic from Russia in the last 48 hours. Germany has offered a ray of hope to these fleeing Russians, promising to consider protection on a case-by-case basis. The German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser stated in an interview that deserters facing serious repression could potentially obtain international protection in Germany. She suggested that those who bravely stand against Putin's regime and thereby put themselves in great danger might qualify for asylum due to political persecution. However, the situation isn't as hopeful in several other European nations, including those sharing borders with Russia like the Baltic states and Finland, where entry restrictions for Russian citizens have been put in place. Air travel, once a more convenient escape route, has become increasingly complicated. Many European and North American nations have banned Russian airlines from their airspace, and Moscow's reciprocal bans have further limited travel options. Flights to visa-free countries such as Turkey, Serbia, and Dubai were fully booked by Thursday. What's the situation like in Russia, and why the mass exodus? Last September, President Vladimir Putin unveiled his strategy to address Russia's military shortfalls. He announced the partial mobilization of approximately 300,000 military reservists, asserting that the call to service would only affect those with prior combat experience. This move, however, according to Alex Titov, a Russia analyst at Queen's University, Belfast, marks a pivotal moment in the invasion of Ukraine. Titov explains that the initial strategy of a swift professional military operation has fallen short of expectations, compelling the Russian administration to resort to an unpopular and possibly detrimental tactic, the formal mobilization of the civilian populace. The precise number of citizens to be conscripted, the duration of this mobilization, and its definitive end remain unclear, adding a veil of uncertainty over the populace. Contrary to these reports, the Russian government downplayed the claims of a mass exodus. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov dismissed reports of overcrowded airports and individuals fleeing as overblown and largely false. In St. Petersburg, billboards promoting military service featuring a serviceman and a slogan reading "Serving Russia is a real job" serve as a stark reminder of the government's stance. This continuing wave of Russians seeking to evade the draft could potentially create complications for Putin's regime. If the exodus proves large enough, Titov speculates that the Russian government might impose formal restrictions on men of conscription age traveling abroad, or require them to carry special paperwork permitting their departure. However, Titov also raises the question of the actual impact of this situation. He highlights the fact that the individuals fleeing may not align with those primarily targeted for conscription, which tends to focus on more remote, less urban areas. The Russian government insists that those drafted possess specific military experience or training, but there is a growing number of reports contradicting this claim, alleging that regular civilians are being coerced into service. Cases like Dmitry, a student from Moscow with no military ties who was abruptly drafted, stand in stark contrast to the government's assurances. Many conscripts are apparently being sourced from Russia's more remote regions, such as Pavel Sokolov from the eastern city of Yakutsk, who found himself unexpectedly receiving draft papers a decade after his last stint in the army. What does the future hold for Russia amid the draft crisis? As we look to the future, the implications of the draft crisis in Russia present a complex and uncertain picture. The large-scale evasion of conscription paints a vivid portrait of public sentiment towards the ongoing conflict and the Russian government's approach. This growing resistance against the draft could have significant consequences for Putin's regime. If these trends persist, it's plausible that we could see an increasing divide between the government and its people, potentially destabilizing Putin's hold on power. The imposition of travel restrictions on men of conscription age and other drastic measures could fuel further dissent, potentially sparking larger, more widespread protests. At the same time, this crisis is likely to have a long-term impact on Russia's international standing. The unfolding humanitarian situation at the borders, combined with accusations of forced conscription and repression of protests, may further isolate Russia in the international arena. Countries that have traditionally been cautious about criticizing Russia might find themselves reassessing their stance. However, it's important to note that Putin's administration has weathered crises before, and it possesses substantial resources to control narratives domestically, repress dissent, and withstand international pressure. Therefore, it remains to be seen whether this crisis will lead to significant political change within the country. Finally, the draft crisis and its fallout underscore the human toll of conflict. The stories of those fleeing conscription, the families they leave behind, and the uncertainty they face provide a sobering perspective on the war and the challenges that lie ahead. These individual stories, as much as the broader geopolitical implications, will be crucial in understanding and responding to the evolving situation in Russia. While it's difficult to predict with certainty what the future holds, one thing is clear. The draft crisis represents a critical moment in Russia's military strategy, its internal politics, and its relationship with the rest of the world. Its resolution will have far-reaching implications, not only for the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but also for the future direction of Russia itself.